Hello and welcome back. Here is my solution to Challenge 6, Chapter 3, Form Validation. As you saw from the demo, you have a series of fields that you want to be validated and show the user what field is in focus and if the field content is invalid. You need to make the first field in focus and you want to use a dollar derived for the text area. Now I didn't mention it in the objective, but I ended up using a dollar effect also. Let's take a look at the code. I start off by setting a const as I want to use this both to initialize and reset the person object. Const do not need to be assigned as $state, as they are const, while $state declares reactive, changeable variables. I want a variable to determine whether the form is valid and use this to disable or enable the submit button. Now, when I planned this challenge, I was thinking to use a function to initially set the focus to the first field on load, and while this actually worked some of the time, thinking reactively, we want to make sure that the DOM is loaded before the focus is set, so I used an $effect here. Remember, effect updates last, so DOM updates will be done, and then effect will ensure that the focus is set correctly. As mentioned in the objective, use $derive to set the display text, which converts the person object to a JSON formatted string. Anytime the person object changes, the display text will immediately re-render, as derived is immediate. I mentioned in the challenge video that when you type a character into any of the fields, the display text is immediately updating, even though, as you will see below, I'm using onChange event, which fires when then field is completed, unlike onInput which fires at every character. The reason again is that $derived is immediate. Okay, next I set up an errors object for validation, and I have function validate field, which ensures no field is empty and in particular that phone and zip must be digits or 10 and 5 respectively. This updates the errors object ID there are any errors. Next, check if the form is valid, i.e. all fields are validated, using the object values. What this does is 1. Convert errors object values to an array and ensure every error message in an empty string, which means no validation issue. 2. Converts person object to an array and ensure every field is not empty after trimming white space. Next, we have the form onSubmit function, which displays an alert of the person object as a JSON string. Finally, I was using an $inspect rune to check on is form valid. This is preferred to console logs, as if you accidentally leave this in the final ship code, it is excluded by Svelte, while console logs are included. You can remove or comment out the $inspect or open your console and see what happens to this. It's not too exciting, but you will see an init false initially, as this is declared false in the code initially. When you enter all fields correctly, you will then see update true. Like console.log, it is very useful to see what is happening to variables and as such a useful debugging tool. Okay, so that's the script. Now the markup. We need inputs for each field. We are binding value to each attribute of the person object. We are using onChange and onBlur to call the validate function and then using a conditional render for the error message. The onChange event is triggered on completion of input of a field, whereas onInput is triggered for every character typed into a field. onBlur is used in case you tab off or click off a field. And we have a dynamic class binding or conditional class which is used to show a different border, red, for errors. I'm not going to go through every field as they are fairly similar. But for the phone number field, note that I have a title equals, please enter digits only. When you hover on this field, it displays the title. Also, to ensure no characters are entered, I am also using onInput, which activates after every character so I can catch and prevent characters being entered. And I am doing the same for zip code. Note, instead of using the onInput and onChange for these, we could just use an onInput and call the validate field function and have the logic controlled there, which would in fact be better to centralize the logic. In fact, ideally this logic would be in a separate server-side file. The text area is read-only and directly displays the reactive display text with the function brackets, as $derived returns a function. Next, you have the submit button, which is disabled if isFormValid is not true and has an onClick that calls the onSubmit function. As we saw, any change to the person object was immediately reflected in the text area display. And finally, the reset button, which has an onClick event using an inline function to reset person equals per reset. So, there you have it. That's my solution to this challenge. Now, I do have another solution to this, using a field component, a callback function, and a JSON file for the field structure, but I think that's a little complex at this stage. Perhaps for the next chapter. Let's wrap this up with a look at what was covered in this challenge. The key concepts covered were: 1. Reactivity, use $state for managing form data, validation errors with $effect for setting initial docus, and $derived for real-time JSON display of form data. 2. Dynamic validation, used validate field function for field-specific validation and real-time restrictions with onInput for digits only. 3. Conditional styling, apply dynamic styles, e.g., error border, to indicate validation errors visually and darker border for in-focus. 4. Event handling, implement onInput, onChange, onBlue with real-time validation and error management. 5. User experience, provide real-time feedback, disable the submit button based on validation, and ensure consistent field behavior, e.g., focus on reset. Okay, that's a wrap on Challenge 6, Chapter 3. I hope that you were able to come up with a solution, and don't worry if it was not the same as mine. Are you thirsty for some more challenges? Please like and subscribe so that I can continue to provide more exercises and challenges. Please leave constructive comments and let me know of other topics you want to cover. There is a lot more in the pipeline, and even though the focus is on signals, a lot more is covered. Please drop me an email and share your code, or let me know of any issues or requests. I will see you in the next challenge.